Have you ever felt like your brain is just spinning out of control when you're worried about something? You know that feeling, right? Just being on high alert, waiting for that other shoe to drop? Well, today, we're going to pop the hood and see what's really going on in our brains when we're staring down an uncertain threat.
Seriously, think about it for a second. That feeling of waiting for your exam results, or gearing up for a tough conversation, maybe waiting for a call back from the doctor. That period of just not knowing can be absolutely brutal. It often feels way more draining than actually dealing with the thing itself. So what's the deal? Why does uncertainty send our brains into such a tailspin?
For the longest time, neuroscience had a pretty simple story to tell about all this. It was a really neat and tidy explanation that basically sorted our response to danger into two separate little boxes. One for when the threat is crystal clear, and another for when it's all foggy and uncertain.
All right, so let's unpack this old story. The one that for years was pretty much the textbook answer for how our brains are supposed to handle danger.
So the idea was pretty straightforward. Fear, that was for clear and present danger. You know, like a snake suddenly appearing right at your feet. Scientists said that job belonged to a part of the brain called the amygdala, kind of like our immediate threat detector. Anxiety, on the other hand, was for a potential danger, the idea that a snake might be hiding in the grass somewhere. And that job supposedly was handled by a completely different area called the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, or just BST for short. So, two different feelings, two different brain regions. Simple, clean, easy.
And listen, this wasn't some fringe theory. This whole strict segregation idea became so accepted that it was literally written into the official research guidelines for the National Institute of Mental Health. I mean, for all intents and purposes, this was scientific gospel.
But, good science is all about questioning the gospel. So a team of researchers decided it was high time to put this neat little story and the anxious brain itself right under the microscope.
To do this, some really clever folks at the University of Maryland came up with an experiment they called the Maryland Threat Countdown. And the goal was simple: to see if this old story about two separate brain systems for fear and anxiety actually held up under pressure.
Okay, so here's how they set it up. They put 99 people into an fMRI scanner so they could watch their brains working in real time. First up was the certain threat. The person in the scanner saw a clear countdown on the screen: 30, 29, 28. They knew exactly when a nasty little electric shock was coming. Then things got interesting. In the uncertain threat condition, they just saw a random jumble of numbers. They still knew a shock was on its way, they just had absolutely no clue when. It's basically the perfect scientific recipe for making someone feel super anxious.
And boy, did that recipe work. Just look at this chart of the self-reported anxiety levels. Yeah, both situations were stressful, for sure, but the really crucial thing here is that the uncertain threat, that not knowing, just sent people's anxiety levels through the roof. The experiment was a total success. They had created exactly the state of mind they wanted to study.
So, the stage was perfectly set. The participants were good and anxious, all in the name of science, of course. Now came the million-dollar question: what in the world was happening inside their brains? And believe me, the answer was a real curveball.
So, did the brain scans light up the way the old story predicted? Did they see two separate systems jump into action? The amygdala handling the certain threat and the BST taking care of the uncertain one?
The answer from the brain scans was a clear and unambiguous nope, not at all. The old story was officially busted.
Instead of two separate systems, the scans revealed something incredible. There's just one single shared threat network. The exact same core parts of the brain. And yes, that includes both the amygdala and the BST. They lit up for both the predictable threat and the unpredictable one. It's a concept called anatomical co-localization, which is just a fancy way of saying they share the same address in the brain.
Okay, so if it's not two different systems, then what is the difference between how our brain handles fear versus anxiety? Well, it turns out it's not a difference in kind, it's a difference in degree.
What the study found is that this shared network acts as what's called a fractionated network. The best way to think about it is like a highly specialized emergency response team. The whole team is on alert when a threat pops up, but depending on the specific crisis, different specialists on the team step forward to take charge.
And here's how that team operates. When the threat was uncertain, the brain's thinking centers, the strategists and planners, like the prefrontal cortex, they ramped way up. The brain was basically working overtime, trying to monitor everything and predict what might happen. But when the threat was certain, the more reactive parts of the network, the extended amygdala, took the lead.
The job was no longer about thinking and planning, it was just about bracing for impact.
So the crucial point, the line that sums it all up, and this comes straight from the researchers themselves, is that the brain's response is a difference in degree, not in kind. It isn't one system for fear and a totally different one for anxiety. It's one flexible, integrated system that just shifts its focus depending on the problem it's facing.
So what's the big picture here? Why does this matter? Well, this isn't just some minor correction in a dusty old textbook. Understanding this new story has some pretty profound implications.
All right, let's just quickly recap the main points. The biggest thing to remember is that fear and anxiety don't live in separate houses in the brain. They share one big, dynamic, flexible network. That old story, amygdala for fear, BST for anxiety, it's just a massive oversimplification. The real difference is all about how that one network shifts its activity, calling on more thinking power when things are uncertain and more reacting power when the danger is clear. And really importantly, getting this model right is a huge step toward creating better, more targeted treatments for anxiety disorders.
And that leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to chew on. If our own brains don't actually treat fear and anxiety as these fundamentally separate things, but more like different points on a single spectrum of how we respond to threats, maybe we shouldn't either.